I never imagined that discovering my parents lied about wanting a quiet Christmas would lead to uncovering the most elaborate con game our family had ever faced. There I was, scrolling through photos of their house packed with relatives and strangers, including my sister's boyfriend's so-called daughters, who had been systematically manipulating everyone for months. The betrayal cut deep as I realized they had chosen these people over their own daughter. But what really shocked them was the video I sent my father showing the $29,600 restored truck I had secretly purchased for him. 90 minutes later, he was pounding on my apartment door. My name is Velma, and at 28 years old, I thought I had figured out how families were supposed to work. As a pediatric nurse in Denver, Colorado, I spent my days caring for children whose parents would do anything to protect them. I assumed my own family operated the same way. My parents, Susan and Robert, lived in a comfortable suburban neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, where my father worked as an electrician, and my mother had recently retired from teaching elementary school. They had always been the kind of parents who remembered birthdays, sent care packages during college, and made every holiday feel magical. My sister Janet, 3 years older at 31, lived in Seattle with her boyfriend Marcus. Janet had always been the creative one, the one who took risks and lived life on her own terms. Growing up, I was the responsible daughter who got good grades and stayed out of trouble, while Janet was the adventurous spirit who kept our parents on their toes. Despite our different personalities, we maintained a close relationship, talking regularly and visiting each other whenever possible. The dynamic in our family had always been stable and predictable. I visited Phoenix monthly, driving the 5-hour route between Denver and Phoenix like clockwork. These visits were sacred to me, a chance to reconnect with the people who had shaped me into the woman I had become. My parents and I would spend hours working in their garden, sharing meals, and catching up on life. They were genuinely interested in my career, my relationships, and my dreams for the future. Everything started changing in late September when Janet began bringing up Marcus's daughters during our weekly family video calls. Sophia, 16, and Emma, 14, were described as sweet girls who had been through difficult circumstances with their biological mother. According to Janet, Marcus had been raising them as a single father after their mother abandoned them 2 years earlier. The girls supposedly had no other family and looked up to Marcus as their only stable parental figure. During one particular phone conversation in early October, my mother's voice took on that special tone she reserved for discussing children in need. Susan had always been drawn to helping kids who faced challenges, which made her an exceptional teacher and explained why she connected so quickly with stories about Sophia and Emma. She began asking detailed questions about the girls' interests, their school performance, and whether they had enough warm clothes for the approaching winter. My father, typically more reserved about getting emotionally involved with people outside our immediate circle, seemed equally charmed by what he heard about these teenagers. Robert had always been a practical man who expressed love through actions rather than words, but something about Marcus's situation seemed to touch his protective instincts. He started mentioning projects around his house that might interest teenage girls, wondering aloud if they might enjoy learning basic electrical work or helping with his vintage truck restoration hobby. As October progressed, the girls became a regular topic of conversation during every family interaction. Janet would share stories about their academic achievements, their artistic talents, and their gratitude for having Marcus in their lives. According to my sister, both girls were honor students who participated in community service and helped their neighbors without being asked. They sounded almost too perfect, which should have been my first warning sign. The turning point came during my monthly visit to Phoenix in late October. I had arrived on a Friday evening planning to spend the weekend helping my parents prepare their house for the upcoming holiday season. We were sitting in their living room after dinner sharing stories and catching up on local news when Janet called for our usual family video chat. This time, however, the conversation took an unexpected direction that would change everything. Marcus appeared on the screen alongside Janet, and for the first time, I got to see the man who had captured my sister's heart. He was charming in an effortless way, with the kind of smile that made you want to trust him immediately. He spoke about his daughters with what seemed like genuine love and concern, describing their individual personalities and dreams for the future. Sophia was apparently interested in pursuing veterinary medicine, while Emma showed remarkable talent in digital art and graphic design. But then I heard something that made my stomach clench with unease. In the background of Janet's apartment, I could clearly hear a teenage girl crying softly, the kind of heartbroken sobbing that speaks to deep emotional pain. Marcus quickly explained that Sophia was having a difficult evening because she had been thinking about the upcoming holiday season and how different it would be from previous years when their family was intact. My mother immediately responded with the compassion that had defined her career working with children. Susan asked if there was anything she could do to help, whether the girls might benefit from talking to someone who understood the challenges of blended families. The conversation shifted as Marcus gently coaxed Sophia to come speak with us, and soon we were looking at a tearful teenager who seemed genuinely distraught about her family situation. Sophia explained through her tears that she and Emma had nowhere to go for Christmas this year. Their biological father apparently wanted nothing to do with them, and they felt like burdens on everyone around them. She spoke about feeling guilty for disrupting Marcus and Janet's relationship, wondering if they would be better off in foster care, where they wouldn't complicate anyone else's life. The raw emotion in her voice was completely convincing, and I watched my parents' faces soften with immediate sympathy. Without hesitation, my mother promised that the girls would always have a place in our family's holiday celebrations. Susan spoke directly to Sophia, assuring her that love makes families, not biology, and that she and Emma were welcome in our home anytime they needed sanctuary. My father nodded along, adding that their house had plenty of room and that he would enjoy having young people around to share his hobbies and interests. As I listened to this exchange, something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what troubled me. The timing seemed too convenient, the emotional manipulation too perfectly calibrated to trigger my parents' protective instincts. Sophia's distress appeared genuine, but there was something theatrical about the way the conversation unfolded, as if everyone except me was following a script. The call ended with plans for Marcus, Janet, and the girls to spend Christmas in Phoenix, effectively transforming our traditional family gathering into something completely different. My parents were energized by the prospect of hosting these young women who needed their support, already making mental lists of gifts to buy and activities to plan. They spoke excitedly about showing the girls around their neighborhood, introducing them to family friends, and creating new holiday traditions that would help heal their emotional wounds. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all being manipulated in ways we didn't understand. The rational part of my mind reminded me that teenagers in difficult family situations often struggle during holiday seasons, and that Sophia's emotional breakdown was probably completely legitimate. But something about Marcus's smooth explanations and the convenient timing of events kept me awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering what we might be missing. The weekend visit concluded with my parents already deep in planning mode for Christmas. They discussed converting the guest room into a comfortable space for teenage girls researching local activities that might interest them and budgeting for additional holiday expenses. Their enthusiasm was infectious and heartwarming, reminding me why I loved them so much. They had always been the type of people who opened their hearts and home to anyone in need. As I drove back to Denver that Sunday evening, I found myself questioning whether my unease was justified or simply the result of adjusting to changes in our family dynamic. Perhaps I was being selfish, reluctant to share my parents' attention with people who genuinely needed their support. Maybe my protective instincts were overreacting to a situation that was actually beautiful in its generosity and compassion. But deep in my gut, I knew something was terribly wrong, even if I couldn't yet understand what we were all walking into. November arrived with the crisp promise of holiday preparations, but instead of excitement, I found myself consumed with a growing unease about my family's Christmas plans. The feeling intensified after every conversation with my parents, who seemed increasingly enchanted by Marcus's daughters and their heartwarming stories of resilience and gratitude. Something about the perfectness of these narratives bothered me in ways I struggled to articulate even to myself. My nursing background had taught me to trust my instincts when something felt off about a patient's condition, even when the symptoms seemed minor or inconsistent. This same intuition was now screaming warnings about Marcus and his family situation, prompting me to do something I had never done before: investigate someone my family trusted. The decision felt like a betrayal of my sister's judgment, but I couldn't ignore the persistent feeling that we were all being deceived. I started with simple internet searches looking up Marcus's name combined with various details he had shared about his background. He claimed to work in pharmaceutical sales, specifically focusing on hospital equipment in the Pacific Northwest region. According to his stories, he had been with the same company for 8 years and had built strong relationships with medical facilities throughout Washington and Oregon. But when I searched professional databases and company directories, I found no record of anyone with his name working in pharmaceutical sales in that geographic area. The inconsistencies multiplied as I dug deeper. Marcus had mentioned attending the University of Washington for his business degree, but alumni records showed no match for his name during the years he claimed to have been a student there. He had described growing up in Portland and attending specific high schools that I was familiar with from my nursing network, but when I discreetly reached out to contacts in that area, nobody remembered anyone matching his description from those institutions. Most troubling of all were the details about his relationship with Sophia and Emma's biological mother. According to Marcus's version of events, he had been married to their mother for 4 years before she developed serious addiction problems that made her an unfit parent. He claimed to have gone through a lengthy custody battle to protect the girls from her destructive behavior, ultimately winning full parental rights when she abandoned them completely. However, when I searched court records for custody proceedings involving his name, I found absolutely nothing. No marriage certificates, no divorce papers, no custody agreements, and no legal documentation establishing any parental relationship between Marcus and these teenagers. For someone who claimed to be their legal guardian, he seemed to have no official connection to them whatsoever. The revelation that shook me most profoundly came through an unexpected source. One of my nursing colleagues had grown up in Seattle and still maintained connections with social services organizations in that area. When I carefully described the girl's situation without mentioning names, she immediately recognized details that matched a case her friend had handled recently. According to this information, Sophia and Emma were not abandoned children at all, but runaways who had been missing from their actual foster placement for several months. These girls apparently had a history of manipulating sympathetic adults, using fabricated stories of abuse and abandonment to gain access to homes where they could steal money and valuables before disappearing again. They were skilled enough at emotional manipulation that they had successfully deceived multiple families, always working with an adult accomplice who posed as a caring boyfriend or relative to give their stories credibility. The possibility that Marcus was using my sister as an unwitting gateway to access our family's resources made me physically sick. I imagine Janet's genuine feelings being exploited by someone who saw her only as a tool for his criminal activities. Worse yet, I pictured my parents' generous hearts being systematically milked by people who viewed their kindness as weakness to be exploited. Armed with this disturbing information, I decided to approach my parents with my concerns during my November visit to Phoenix. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to sound accusatory or paranoid, but hoping to plant seeds of caution that might prompt them to ask more questions about Marcus's background. I suggested they might want to verify some of his stories, particularly the legal arrangements regarding the girls, before committing to extensive holiday plans. My parents' reaction was swift and disappointing. My mother immediately dismissed my concerns as jealousy, suggesting that I was uncomfortable sharing their attention with young people who genuinely needed their support. My father was more diplomatic, but equally unconvinced, pointing out that Marcus seemed like a decent man who was trying his best to care for children in a difficult situation. They both made it clear that they considered my suspicions unfounded and hurtful to people who deserved compassion rather than skepticism. Janet's response was even more crushing when my parents mentioned my concerns during our next family video call. My sister accused me of being judgmental and narrow-minded, unable to accept that some people actually faced genuine hardships that required community support. She defended Marcus, passionately describing how hard he worked to provide for the girls and how much they meant to him. According to Janet, my attitude was exactly the kind of cynicism that prevented good people from getting help when they needed it most. The family tension created by my warnings made me question whether I was indeed being paranoid and possessive. Perhaps my research had led me down rabbit holes that didn't actually connect to our specific situation. Maybe Marcus had reasons for the inconsistencies I had discovered, explanations that would make perfect sense if I had approached him directly instead of conducting secret investigations. The possibility that I was damaging family relationships based on unfounded suspicions weighed heavily on my conscience. But even as I second-guessed myself, new red flags continued to appear during subsequent conversations with my family. Sophia had allegedly shared details about their family's financial struggles, mentioning overdue medical bills and the possibility that they might lose their apartment if they couldn't catch up on rent payments. Emma had supposedly written a heartfelt letter to my father, describing how much his grandfather-like presence meant to her during this difficult period in her life. These emotional appeals had predictable effects on my parents' generous hearts. My mother began asking me to contribute to a special Christmas fund that would help cover presents for the girls and possibly assist with their housing situation. My father started researching scholarships and educational opportunities that might benefit teenagers in challenging circumstances, clearly inspired by their stories of academic achievement despite personal hardships. The manipulation was so skillfully orchestrated that I found myself admiring its sophistication, even while dreading its ultimate consequences. Marcus and his accomplices had obviously studied my family carefully, identifying exactly which emotional buttons to push to generate maximum sympathy and financial support. They understood that my parents' compassion could be weaponized against them by people skilled enough to craft compelling narratives of victimhood and gratitude. As December approached, I realized that direct confrontation had failed to protect my family from what I increasingly believed was an elaborate con game. My parents were too emotionally invested in helping these supposed victims to consider the possibility that they were being systematically deceived and robbed. Janet was too romantically involved with Marcus to see him objectively, and her defensive reactions suggested that questioning his integrity felt like personal attacks on her judgment and character. Faced with this impossible situation, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to fight a battle I couldn't win through conventional means, I would focus my energy on preparing something so meaningful and unexpected that it might shock my family into recognizing the difference between genuine love and calculated manipulation. I would give my father a gift so extraordinary that it would demonstrate what real family devotion looked like, providing a stark contrast to the false emotions being performed by Marcus's crew. The idea had been growing in my mind since childhood, inspired by countless hours spent in my father's garage watching him restore vintage automobiles with the patience and skill of a true craftsman. Robert had always dreamed of owning a 1972 Chevrolet pickup truck in pristine condition, the same model he had learned to drive on his grandfather's farm in rural Arizona. He had shown me pictures of that original truck countless times, describing its distinctive lines and powerful engine with the reverence other people reserved for discussing works of art. Throughout November and early December, I quietly researched classic truck dealers and restoration specialists looking for the perfect vehicle that would fulfill my father's lifelong dream. The search led me to a specialty dealer in Colorado Springs who had recently completed a full restoration of exactly the model I was seeking. The price tag of $29,600 represented most of my savings, but the opportunity to give my father something that would truly overwhelm him with joy felt worth any financial sacrifice. The truck was absolutely magnificent, painted in deep metallic blue with chrome accents that gleamed like mirrors under showroom lights. Every mechanical component had been rebuilt to factory specifications, and the interior featured genuine leather seats that maintained the original design while incorporating modern comfort features. The dealer assured me that this particular vehicle was among the finest examples of its kind anywhere in the country, a rolling piece of automotive history that any collector would treasure. As I finalized the purchase arrangements, my parents called to deliver news that confirmed my worst fears about the Christmas situation. They had decided to uninvite me from their holiday celebration, claiming they wanted a quiet Christmas with just immediate family. When I asked about Marcus and the girls, my mother stammered unconvincingly that they would probably stop by briefly, but that the gathering would be much smaller than usual. The transparent lie stung more than an honest admission would have. My parents were obviously planning a large celebration that would include Marcus's crew, but exclude their own daughter, probably because they knew I would continue asking uncomfortable questions about the background stories that didn't add up. They preferred the company of manipulative strangers to their child who loved them enough to try protecting them from financial and emotional exploitation. I agreed to respect their wishes for a quiet Christmas, hiding my devastation behind a calm voice that gave no hint of the pain and anger churning inside me. But as I hung up the phone, I was already planning my response to their betrayal. The truck would become more than a Christmas gift. It would serve as evidence of what genuine family love looked like, and a challenge to recognize the difference between real devotion and calculated performance. The Christmas confrontation that would change everything was now inevitable, though none of us yet understood how dramatically our family dynamics were about to shift. December 20th arrived with the weight of unspoken tensions and carefully maintained facades. I had spent the past week perfecting my response to being excluded from Christmas, channeling my hurt and anger into creating something that would expose the fundamental differences between genuine family love and the elaborate charade my parents had embraced. The restored truck sat in a secure garage in Colorado Springs, waiting for the moment when it would deliver a message more powerful than any words I could speak. My sister Janet, perhaps feeling guilty about the family dynamics, or simply excited about the Christmas preparations, made a critical error that would unravel everything. During her video call with our parents on December 21st, she began enthusiastically describing the decorations and party plans, forgetting that our family group chat included me as an active participant. Her excitement overcame her caution as she shared photos of the elaborate preparations taking place at our parents' house. The images she posted revealed everything my parents had lied about regarding their desire for a quiet Christmas with immediate family. The living room displayed a massive Christmas tree that reached almost to the ceiling, decorated with enough ornaments and lights to illuminate a commercial display. The dining room table was extended to its maximum length and set with fine china for at least 12 people, surrounded by additional folding tables that suggested preparations for a much larger gathering. Most damning of all were the background details that revealed the scope of the deception. Wrapped presents were stacked several feet high under the tree with name tags clearly visible for people I had never heard of. The kitchen counters overflowed with ingredients for a feast that would obviously feed dozens of guests rather than the small group my parents had described. Every surface sparkled with expensive decorations that had not been part of their collection during my previous visits. The photographs painted a picture of celebration and abundance that stood in stark contrast to the modest, quiet gathering my parents had claimed to want. This was clearly going to be a major holiday party involving extended family neighbors, and Marcus's crew exactly the type of event from which they had deliberately excluded me. The betrayal cut deeper than simple exclusion. They had actively lied about their intentions to avoid dealing with my presence and my uncomfortable questions. I quickly took screenshots of every image before Janet realized her mistake and began deleting them from the group chat. Within minutes, all evidence of the party preparations had vanished from our family conversation, leaving only my saved copies as proof of what I had discovered. The attempt to cover up the slip confirmed that my exclusion was intentional and coordinated, not simply a matter of wanting a quiet holiday. The emotional impact of seeing concrete evidence of my family's deception was overwhelming. I sat in my Denver apartment staring at the photos that proved my parents preferred the company of manipulative strangers to their own daughter. The elaborate preparations they had made for Marcus's fake family stood in stark contrast to the casual dismissal I had received when they uninvited me from Christmas. They were clearly willing to spend significant time, money, and energy creating a magical holiday experience for people who were systematically deceiving them while treating their loyal daughter as an inconvenience to be avoided. The injustice of the situation demanded action that went beyond simply confronting them with evidence of their lies. They needed to see concrete proof of what genuine family love looked like, contrasted against the false emotions being performed by Marcus and his accomplices. The truck would serve this purpose perfectly, demonstrating the depth of my devotion while challenging them to recognize the difference between real sacrifice and calculated manipulation. On December 22nd, I drove to Phoenix under the pretense of Christmas shopping in their area, a cover story that would explain my presence in their neighborhood if anyone spotted me. I parked across the street from their house in the late afternoon, positioning myself where I could observe the activity without being noticed by anyone inside. What I witnessed confirmed my worst fears about the scope of the deception and the extent of my family's vulnerability to emotional manipulation. Multiple vehicles filled their driveway and lined the street, including Marcus's distinctive black BMW and several other cars I didn't recognize. Through the large front windows, I could see inside to a full-scale Christmas party in progress. Neighbors I recognized from years of visiting were mingling with extended relatives who typically only appeared at major family events. The gathering was clearly the opposite of the quiet, intimate celebration my parents had described when they uninvited me. But the most painful sight was watching Marcus, Sophia, and Emma move through the crowd like honored guests receiving attention and affection that should have been reserved for actual family members. My parents were clearly playing host to people who were systematically robbing them, treating the con artists with more warmth and respect than they had shown their own daughter. The contrast between their enthusiasm for these strangers and their casual dismissal of me was almost too painful to process. As I continued watching, an open window allowed me to overhear fragments of conversation that confirmed my suspicions about the financial dimensions of the scam. Marcus was speaking to a group of neighbors about how grateful he was for the generosity of older folks who really understand family values. He described my parents as the kind of people who still believe in helping others without expecting anything in return, language that sounded like a predator discussing particularly vulnerable prey. Sophia and Emma were equally skilled at their performance, circulating among the guests with exactly the right combination of gratitude and vulnerability to maintain sympathy while avoiding suspicion. They spoke eloquently about their appreciation for being welcomed into such a loving family, describing my parents as the grandparent figures they had never had the chance to know. Their emotional manipulation was so polished that even I might have been convinced if I hadn't already discovered the holes in their background stories. The most devastating moment came when I recognized wrapped packages that bore my name as the purchaser. Several expensive items I had contributed money toward were clearly visible under the tree, intended as gifts for Sophia and Emma rather than for family members, as I had been told. My financial contributions to the family Christmas fund were being used to buy presents for teenagers who were actively participating in a con game designed to exploit my parents' generosity. The realization that my own money was being used to fund the deception felt like a physical blow. I had unknowingly become an accomplice to my parents' financial exploitation, providing resources that Marcus's crew used to purchase gifts that would further cement their fabricated family relationships. The manipulators were using my love for my parents as a weapon against them, turning my desire to contribute to family happiness into another tool for their criminal enterprise. Sitting in my car across from the house where I had grown up, watching strangers enjoy the warmth and love that should have included me, I felt a profound sense of loss that went beyond simple exclusion. This wasn't just about missing Christmas dinner. It was about discovering that the people who had raised me were willing to choose elaborate lies over simple truth, preferring the company of skilled manipulators to their daughter who loved them enough to ask difficult questions. The weight of this betrayal crystallized my resolve to proceed with the truck plan, but now it would serve purposes beyond simply demonstrating my love for my father. The gift would become evidence in a larger case about the difference between authentic devotion and calculated performance. It would force my parents to confront the contrast between my genuine sacrifice and the false emotions being sold to them by people who viewed them as sources of money and shelter rather than human beings deserving of real affection. I drove directly from their neighborhood to the specialty dealer in Colorado Springs, where the restored truck waited in pristine condition. The dealer had agreed to help me create a video presentation that would maximize the emotional impact of the gift while clearly documenting the sacrifice I had made to purchase it. We spent several hours that evening filming multiple takes of my message, ensuring that every word would convey the depth of my feelings and the significance of what I was offering. The final video began with me standing beside the magnificent truck, its deep blue paint reflecting the dealership lights like liquid metal. I spoke directly to my father about the years we had spent together in his garage, the countless hours he had invested in teaching me to appreciate the artistry of automotive restoration. I explained how his patient instruction had shaped my understanding of dedication, precision, and the satisfaction that comes from creating something beautiful through careful work. I detailed the months I had spent researching and saving to find this specific truck, describing how every overtime shift and every financial sacrifice had been motivated by my desire to give him something that would truly honor his passion and expertise. The purchase represented the majority of my savings accumulated through years of careful budgeting and planning, all invested in a single gesture of love for the man who had taught me the value of both hard work and family loyalty. But the most important part of the message addressed the painful reality of our current family situation. I acknowledged discovering their Christmas deception and expressed my heartbreak over being excluded in favor of people whose background stories didn't withstand basic scrutiny. I spoke about the difference between genuine family relationships and the performance art being conducted by Marcus and his accomplices, challenging my father to recognize which category our connection belonged in. The video concluded with me holding the truck keys, explaining that the vehicle belonged to him regardless of how he chose to respond to my message. The gift was unconditional, given out of love rather than expectation, demonstrating the kind of authentic devotion that Marcus's crew could only imitate, but never genuinely feel. I ended with a simple statement that the truck represented real love, and that I hoped someday that would mean something to him again. As I prepared to send this message into a family situation that had already caused me profound pain, I knew that the consequences might include permanent estrangement from the people who had shaped my life. But I also understood that remaining silent would mean watching them continue to be exploited by criminals who saw their kindness as weakness to be monetized. The truck video would force a confrontation that was long overdue, regardless of how devastating the immediate aftermath might prove to be. The Christmas morning that would change everything was now less than 48 hours away. December 24th dawned clear and cold in Denver, carrying the crisp promise of revelations that would transform my family forever. I had spent a restless night reviewing the video message I had created, ensuring that every word conveyed the appropriate balance of love, disappointment, and challenge. The truck sat in its secure garage, waiting to serve as either a bridge toward reconciliation or evidence of a relationship that my parents had chosen to destroy through their preference for manipulative strangers over their loyal daughter. The video production had taken place across multiple sessions to achieve the emotional impact I needed. Standing beside the pristine 1972 Chevrolet pickup, I had crafted a message that would simultaneously demonstrate my profound love for my father and expose the fraudulent family drama being performed by Marcus's crew. The truck itself served as undeniable proof of my devotion, representing months of savings and careful planning, motivated solely by the desire to give my father something that would honor his lifelong passion for automotive restoration. I began the recorded message by addressing my father directly, speaking to the man who had spent countless Saturday mornings teaching me about engines, transmissions, and the patient craftsmanship required to restore classic vehicles to their original glory. I described specific memories of working alongside him in his garage, learning not just mechanical skills, but also the deeper lessons about dedication, precision, and the satisfaction that comes from creating something beautiful through sustained effort and attention to detail. The emotional core of the message focused on explaining how his patient instruction had shaped my understanding of what family relationships should look like. He had taught me that genuine love expresses itself through consistent actions rather than dramatic words, through reliability rather than manipulation, through honest communication rather than calculated performances designed to extract sympathy and resources. These lessons had made me the person I had become, someone who valued authenticity over convenience and truth over comfort. I detailed the extensive research and financial planning that had gone into finding this particular truck, explaining how every overtime shift and every carefully budgeted expense had been motivated by my vision of his reaction to receiving his dream vehicle. The purchase represented the largest single expenditure of my adult life, financed through years of disciplined saving and strategic planning, all invested in a gesture that would demonstrate the depth of my appreciation for everything he had given me throughout my childhood and beyond. But the message also addressed the painful reality of our current family situation with unflinching honesty. I acknowledged discovering their Christmas deception through Janet's accidentally posted photos, expressing my heartbreak over being excluded from celebrations in favor of people whose background stories contained obvious fabrications and inconsistencies. I spoke about the contrast between my proven loyalty and the manufactured emotions being performed by individuals who viewed my parents as targets for financial exploitation rather than human beings deserving of genuine affection. The video included screenshots of the evidence I had gathered during my investigation of Marcus's claimed background, presenting documentation that his professional history, educational credentials, and legal relationship to Sophia and Emma were all fabricated. I explained my discovery that the girls were likely runaway teenagers with a history of manipulating sympathetic adults, working with an adult accomplice to gain access to homes where they could steal money and valuables before disappearing to target their next victims. I challenged my father to consider which relationship represented authentic family connection: my unconditional gift of his dream truck, purchased through genuine sacrifice and given without expectation of reward, or the carefully orchestrated emotional appeals being performed by people who had researched our family specifically to identify which psychological buttons would generate maximum sympathy and financial support. The contrast between real devotion and calculated manipulation should have been obvious to anyone willing to examine the evidence objectively. The message concluded with me holding the truck keys, explaining that the vehicle belonged to him regardless of how he chose to respond to my revelations. The gift was unconditional, motivated by love rather than strategy, demonstrating the kind of authentic generosity that Marcus's crew could only imitate through their rehearsed performances. I ended by stating that the truck represented genuine family love and expressing hope that someday such authenticity would matter to him more than the false emotions being manufactured by skilled con artists. At exactly 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve morning, I sent the video to my father's cell phone, along with the screenshots documenting Marcus's fabricated background and the evidence of the elaborate Christmas party from which I had been excluded. I included a single text message that summarized the situation with devastating simplicity. "This truck represents real love. Hope it was worth it." After sending the message, I turned off my phone and drove home to my Denver apartment, preparing to spend Christmas alone rather than continuing to enable a family dynamic that had become both financially and emotionally destructive. I had done everything possible to protect my parents from sophisticated criminals who were systematically exploiting their generosity, and now the consequences of their choices would unfold without my continued attempts to intervene on their behalf. My apartment felt smaller and quieter than usual as I began accepting the possibility that this Christmas might mark the permanent end of my relationship with my parents and sister. The financial cost of the truck represented years of careful saving, but the emotional cost of watching my family choose elaborate lies over simple truth felt immeasurably higher. I had invested everything in a gesture that might result in complete estrangement from the people who had shaped my understanding of love, loyalty, and family obligation. But even as I grieved the potential loss of these relationships, I felt a profound sense of relief at having finally spoken the truth about what I had discovered. The investigation of Marcus's background and the documentation of my parents' deception had consumed weeks of my emotional energy, creating stress that had begun affecting my work performance and personal well-being. Regardless of how my family responded to the evidence I had presented, I had fulfilled my obligation to warn them about the dangers they were facing. The responses began almost immediately, though I wouldn't discover them until much later. My phone safely turned off and stored in a drawer began receiving a flood of calls and text messages as the video's impact rippled through the Christmas celebration in Phoenix. The evidence I had compiled was apparently compelling enough to prompt immediate investigation of Marcus's claims, leading to discoveries that would validate every suspicion I had developed about the true nature of his relationship with Sophia and Emma. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, the Christmas party was transforming from a celebration into a crisis as my parents confronted Marcus about the inconsistencies I had documented. The facade that had been carefully maintained for months began crumbling under direct questioning, revealing the elaborate criminal enterprise that had been systematically exploiting their generosity and trust. The con game that had seemed so sophisticated and emotionally compelling was about to be exposed in ways that would shock everyone involved. The truck waiting in its Colorado Springs garage would soon serve purposes none of us had anticipated when I first conceived the plan to purchase it. Rather than simply demonstrating my love for my father or providing evidence of authentic family devotion, it was about to become a catalyst for exposing one of the most elaborate holiday scams any of our neighbors had ever encountered. The gift motivated by love was about to deliver justice in ways that would transform not just our family dynamics, but the entire community's understanding of how skilled manipulators operate. The confrontation that would change everything was now just hours away, though none of us yet understood how dramatically the truth would reshape our relationships and our understanding of what genuine family love actually requires. The explosive revelation of Marcus's deception unfolded with devastating speed once my video provided the evidence my parents needed to begin asking the right questions. My father, confronted with documented proof that every aspect of Marcus's background was fabricated, demanded immediate explanations for the inconsistencies I had uncovered during my investigation. The comfortable lies that had sustained the con game for months suddenly became impossible to maintain under direct scrutiny from people who finally understood they were being systematically deceived and robbed. According to what I would learn later, Marcus initially attempted to discredit my research by claiming that I was jealous and vindictive, motivated by resentment over being excluded from Christmas rather than genuine concern for our family's welfare. He suggested that I had deliberately misrepresented information to damage his relationship with Janet and undermine the positive influence he and the girls were having on my parents' lives. His smooth charm and practiced sincerity had worked effectively for months. but now they seemed hollow when contrasted with the concrete evidence of his lies. My father's background as an electrician had given him practical experience in identifying when systems weren't functioning as described skills that translated perfectly to recognizing the mechanical nature of Marcus's emotional manipulation. Robert began asking specific questions about details that Marcus had previously shared, comparing different versions of the same stories and noting discrepancies that had been overlooked during the initial period of sympathy and trust. The inconsistencies multiplied rapidly once someone was actually paying attention to them. The pressure intensified when my mother demanded to see official documentation of Marcus's legal guardianship of Sophia and Emma. Susan's experience as a teacher had involved extensive interaction with child protective services and family courts, giving her knowledge of the paperwork and processes that should exist if Marcus's custody claims were legitimate. When he couldn't produce any official records establishing his parental relationship with the girls, her suspicions crystallized into certainty that they were all being lied to systematically. Emma, the younger of the two girls, proved to be the weakest link in the elaborate deception. Under direct questioning from adults who were no longer charmed by her previous performances, she began contradicting details that Marcus had established as fundamental elements of their cover story. Her nervousness escalated into obvious panic as she realized that the carefully rehearsed narratives were falling apart and that their criminal enterprise was about to be exposed in ways that could result in serious legal consequences. The breakthrough came when Emma finally admitted that she and Sophia barely knew Marcus at all, having met him only a few weeks before he introduced them to Janet as his stepdaughters. Their relationship was purely transactional, with Marcus providing temporary housing and spending money in exchange for their participation in targeting sympathetic families for financial exploitation. They had done this successfully with several other victims, always working with adult accomplices who posed as caring relatives or romantic partners to give their sob stories credibility. Sophia's more sophisticated manipulation skills couldn't overcome the weight of evidence once Emma's confession had established that their entire family situation was fabricated. She attempted to maintain elements of their cover story while acknowledging that some details had been exaggerated for dramatic effect, but my parents were no longer in the mood to give her the benefit of any doubts. They had invested months of emotional energy and significant financial resources in helping people who had been systematically lying to them about every aspect of their supposed circumstances. The investigation of their belongings revealed the scope of the theft that had been taking place throughout their stay in the family's lives. Marcus's BMW contained expensive electronics jewelry and personal items that my parents recognized as missing from their house over the previous weeks. The girls' suitcases held cash gift cards and small valuables that had been systematically pilfered during their visits, accumulated gradually enough that the individual thefts hadn't been noticed, but totaling significant amounts when discovered all together. My sister Janet, confronted with undeniable evidence that her boyfriend was a criminal who had used their relationship to access our family's resources, experienced the devastating realization that her romantic feelings had been completely manipulated for financial gain. Marcus had never cared about her as a person. She had simply been identified as the most vulnerable avenue for approaching our family's generosity and trust. Her emotional investment in their relationship had been weaponized against her by someone who viewed love as just another tool for exploitation. The community response was swift and supportive once the criminal nature of the situation became apparent. Neighbors who had witnessed months of suspicious activity finally felt comfortable sharing their observations with my parents, revealing that multiple people had noticed inconsistencies in Marcus's stories and behaviors, but had been reluctant to interfere in what seemed like family business. The elaborate Christmas party had actually served to expose the scam to a wider audience, making it impossible for Marcus to maintain his facade once multiple witnesses began comparing notes. The local police became involved when Marcus attempted to leave the house with a carload of expensive items that clearly belonged to my parents. His panicked flight confirmed his guilt more effectively than any confession could have, demonstrating that his concern was avoiding criminal charges rather than clearing up alleged misunderstandings about his relationship with our family. The sight of him loading stolen goods into his BMW while Sophia and Emma watched nervously from the sidewalk provided undeniable evidence of the organized nature of their criminal enterprise. The girls were taken into protective custody as runaways who needed social services intervention rather than criminal prosecution. Their young ages and histories of being manipulated by adult criminals made them victims as well as perpetrators, though their sophisticated manipulation skills suggested they were far from innocent participants in the schemes they had been running. The foster care system would need to address both their immediate safety needs and their learned behaviors of targeting sympathetic adults for financial exploitation. Marcus's arrest revealed the broader scope of his criminal activities when police discovered that he was wanted in connection with similar cons across multiple states. My family had been just one target in a systematic operation that identified vulnerable households through social media research, then crafted elaborate deceptions specifically designed to trigger the psychological vulnerabilities that would generate maximum sympathy and financial support. The truck video that had exposed his local crimes also provided evidence that helped law enforcement connect him to additional victims. The neighborhood rallied around my parents as the scope of their exploitation became public knowledge. Multiple families came forward with offers of support and assistance, along with their own stories of suspicious interactions with Marcus that suddenly made sense in the context of his criminal activities. The Christmas party that was supposed to celebrate his fake family instead became a community meeting where neighbors shared information that helped police build a comprehensive case against him and his network. The psychological impact on my parents was profound as they processed the realization that they had been systematically deceived for months by people who viewed their kindness as weakness to be exploited. The violation went beyond financial theft to include emotional manipulation that had turned their natural compassion into a weapon against them. They struggled with guilt over falling for the deception and shame over excluding their loyal daughter in favor of skilled criminals who had studied their psychology specifically to identify which lies would be most effective. But mixed with the pain and embarrassment was a growing appreciation for my persistence in trying to warn them about dangers they had been unwilling to see. The video message that had initially seemed accusatory and hurtful was now recognized as evidence of love profound enough to risk family relationships in order to protect them from continued exploitation. The truck that represented months of my savings and planning stood as proof of authentic devotion that contrasted starkly with the manufactured emotions they had been purchasing with their Christmas generosity. The truth about what genuine family love actually looked like was about to become the foundation for rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by lies, manipulation, and the temporary triumph of criminal charm over honest communication. The truck waiting in Colorado Springs would soon serve as more than just a Christmas gift. It would become a symbol of the authentic connection that survives confrontation with truth and emerges stronger for having been tested by crisis and ultimately validated by justice. At exactly 7:30 on Christmas Eve evening, 90 minutes after I had sent the video message that would change everything, the sound of urgent pounding on my apartment door shattered the quiet solitude I had been using to process the potential end of my family relationships. Through the peephole, I could see my father standing in the hallway, his usually composed demeanor replaced by visible emotional turmoil that made him appear years older than his 56 years. His face was streaked with tears, and he clutched printed screenshots from my video message against his chest, like evidence of some profound personal revelation. The sight of my father in such raw emotional distress immediately undermined my resolve to maintain the protective distance I had established by turning off my phone and preparing for permanent estrangement. Despite everything that had happened, despite the lies and the exclusion and the preference they had shown for manipulative strangers, seeing him in genuine pain activated every instinct I had to comfort and protect the man who had shaped my understanding of integrity and hard work throughout my childhood. I opened the door to find Robert barely able to speak through the combination of exhaustion and emotional overwhelm that had driven him to make the 5-hour journey from Phoenix to Denver without stopping. He had clearly been crying for hours. His voice hoarse from what I would later learn had been extensive confrontations with Marcus, heated arguments with my mother about their collective failure in judgment, and painful conversations with neighbors and police as the full scope of their exploitation became apparent to the entire community. His first words were a broken apology that acknowledged the magnitude of what our family had lost through their willingness to choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. He admitted that everything I had tried to warn them about had been completely accurate, that Marcus and the girls were indeed skilled criminals who had researched our family specifically to identify which psychological vulnerabilities would generate maximum financial and emotional exploitation. The evidence I had compiled during my investigation had provided the foundation for confrontations that had exposed the entire elaborate con game within hours. My father explained the devastating sequence of revelations that had unfolded after my video forced them to begin asking the direct questions they had been avoiding for months. Marcus's inability to produce any documentation of his supposed legal relationship with Sophia and Emma had been the first crack in his facade, followed rapidly by Emma's confession that they barely knew him and were participating in a criminal scheme that had successfully targeted multiple families across several states. The discovery of stolen items in Marcus's possession had transformed suspicion into certainty, leading to his arrest and the girls' placement in protective custody as runaway juveniles who needed social services intervention. My parents' Christmas celebration had become a crime scene investigation with neighbors and police working together to document the scope of the theft and manipulation that had been systematically conducted under the guise of helping disadvantaged teenagers build relationships with caring adults. But the aspect of the situation that had devastated my father most profoundly was recognizing how completely they had failed their loyal daughter in favor of people who viewed their kindness as weakness to be monetized. Robert described the overwhelming guilt he felt about excluding me from Christmas while welcoming criminals into their home, about dismissing my legitimate concerns while embracing lies specifically crafted to exploit their psychological vulnerabilities. The contrast between my genuine sacrifice and Marcus's calculated performance had become undeniable once they were forced to examine the evidence objectively. He spoke about the truck video with a reverence that made it clear he understood the significance of what I had done in purchasing his dream vehicle. The months of saving and careful planning that had gone into finding the perfect restored 1972 Chevrolet represented the kind of authentic devotion that Marcus's crew could only imitate through rehearsed emotional appeals. My willingness to invest the majority of my savings in a gesture that honored his lifelong passion for automotive restoration demonstrated love that required no manipulation or deception to achieve its desired impact. The breakdown in my father's composure when he described watching the video was complete and heartbreaking. This practical man, who had always expressed emotions through actions rather than words, found himself overwhelmed by the realization that his daughter's love was profound enough to risk permanent estrangement in order to protect him from continued exploitation. The truck itself was magnificent, but the sacrifice it represented was what had truly shocked him into recognizing the difference between genuine family connection and the elaborate performance art he had been funding with his Christmas generosity. My own emotional defenses crumbled as I witnessed my father's genuine remorse and his desperate need for forgiveness that went beyond simple acknowledgement of mistakes. The pain in his voice as he described the community's reaction to discovering they had been hosting criminals during their Christmas celebration made it clear that the public embarrassment was secondary to his private grief over nearly destroying his relationship with me through poor judgment and misplaced priorities. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever shared, characterized by a level of emotional honesty that neither of us had previously felt comfortable expressing. Robert acknowledged the pattern of taking my stability and reliability for granted, while investing excessive attention in people who presented themselves as needy or vulnerable. He recognized that my consistent presence in their lives had made my love seem ordinary compared to the dramatic appeals for help that Marcus and the girls had crafted to trigger maximum sympathy. He also admitted that part of their attraction to the fake family situation had been the appeal of feeling needed by young people who expressed extravagant gratitude for every gesture of support. My quiet competence and independence had made me seem less deserving of their attention than teenagers who presented themselves as emotionally damaged and desperately grateful for adult guidance. The manipulation had been so skillfully orchestrated that they had never recognized how their desire to be appreciated was being weaponized against them. The healing process began with my father's complete acceptance of responsibility for the choices that had led to our family crisis. He didn't attempt to minimize the impact of their deception or excuse their behavior by claiming they had been victims of sophisticated criminals. Instead, he acknowledged that their willingness to be deceived had been motivated by psychological needs that made them vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Marcus had specialized in providing. My mother's arrival an hour later, driven to Denver by Janet in a journey marked by their own difficult conversations about family dynamics and personal responsibility, expanded the reconciliation into a comprehensive examination of our relationships and communication patterns. Susan's background as an educator gave her insight into how Marcus had studied their family structure to identify exactly which emotional appeals would bypass their critical thinking and generate immediate protective responses. The process of rebuilding trust required honest discussion of the financial dimensions of the exploitation, including the revelation that money I had contributed to their Christmas fund had been used to purchase expensive gifts for the teenage criminals who were systematically robbing them. My parents committed to reimbursing every dollar I had unknowingly contributed to funding my own exclusion from Christmas, along with establishing new protocols for financial decisions that would prevent similar manipulation in the future. But beyond the practical considerations of money and stolen property was the deeper work of reconstructing family relationships based on authentic communication rather than comfortable assumptions. We established new expectations for honesty that would make it impossible for any of us to maintain polite fictions when addressing serious concerns about each other's welfare and judgment. The pain of nearly losing our connection entirely had taught us that family loyalty sometimes requires willingness to engage in confrontations that feel uncomfortable but ultimately protect everyone involved. The evening concluded with plans for a completely different kind of Christmas celebration, one that would be built around authentic connection rather than elaborate performance. The truck would remain the centerpiece of our holiday, not just as an expensive gift, but as a symbol of the genuine devotion that survives honest confrontation and emerges stronger for having been tested by crisis and validated by truth. The reconciliation that had seemed impossible just hours earlier was now the foundation for relationships that would be more honest, more resilient, and more appreciative of the difference between real love and the emotional manipulation that had nearly destroyed everything we actually cared about. Christmas morning arrived with a clarity and peace that none of us had experienced in months, marked by the absence of pretense and the presence of genuine connection that had been restored through painful but necessary confrontation with truth. My father drove the vintage truck for the first time as the sun rose over Denver. His emotional reaction to finally experiencing his dream vehicle, serving as a powerful symbol of what authentic family relationships could accomplish when they were based on real sacrifice rather than calculated manipulation. The legal aftermath of Marcus's arrest unfolded with satisfying completeness as law enforcement connected his local crimes to a broader network of similar cons that had been operating across multiple states. His plea agreement included restitution for all victims and a significant prison sentence that reflected both the scope of his criminal activities and his exploitation of vulnerable populations who had trusted him with their homes and resources. The truck video that had exposed his deception in our family became crucial evidence for prosecuting additional cases where his network had targeted other generous families during holiday seasons. Sophia and Emma were placed in specialized foster care programs designed to address the complex needs of teenagers who had been both victims and perpetrators of systematic manipulation. Their young ages and histories of being exploited by adult criminals qualified them for rehabilitation services rather than punishment, though their sophisticated skills at emotional manipulation required intensive intervention to prevent them from continuing to target sympathetic adults. The foster care system recognized that these girls needed both protection from further exploitation and treatment for behaviors they had learned as survival mechanisms. The community response to our family's experience was overwhelmingly supportive and educational, transforming a private crisis into a public service that helped protect other families from similar manipulation. Local news coverage of Marcus's arrest included interviews with neighbors who described the warning signs they had noticed, but hadn't felt comfortable reporting, creating awareness that helped other potential victims recognize suspicious patterns before becoming financially and emotionally invested in relationships with skilled con artists. My parents' commitment to rebuilding our family relationships was demonstrated through actions rather than just apologies, beginning with their decision to sell their Phoenix house and relocate to Colorado to be closer to me. This major life change represented more than geographic convenience. It symbolized their recognition that proximity to people you genuinely love matters more than maintaining familiar surroundings or social connections that had failed to provide protection when they needed it most. The process of reconstructing trust involved establishing new communication protocols that would make it impossible for any of us to maintain polite fictions when addressing serious concerns about each other's welfare and decisions. We committed to honest feedback, even when it might be uncomfortable to receive, recognizing that family loyalty sometimes requires willingness to engage in confrontations that feel challenging, but ultimately protect everyone involved from poor judgment and external manipulation. Susan channeled her experience with Marcus's deception into volunteer work with elder abuse prevention programs, using her personal story to help other potential victims recognize the warning signs of systematic manipulation before they became financially and emotionally invested in relationships with people who viewed their kindness as weakness to be exploited. Her background as an educator made her particularly effective at teaching seniors about the psychological tactics used by con artists who target generous people during emotionally vulnerable periods. My father's healing process involved returning to his vintage truck restoration hobby with new appreciation for the patience and precision required to create something authentic and lasting. The 1972 Chevrolet became the foundation for a new tradition where we worked together on automotive projects that honored both his mechanical expertise and our renewed commitment to spending quality time together without distractions from people seeking to exploit our family dynamics. Janet's role in our family reconciliation included taking responsibility for her failure to protect our parents from Marcus's manipulation, acknowledging that her romantic involvement had compromised her ability to recognize obvious red flags about his background and intentions. She moved back to Phoenix temporarily to provide emotional support as our parents processed the trauma of their exploitation, while also helping them navigate the legal proceedings that would ultimately deliver justice for multiple families who had been victimized by Marcus's network. The financial recovery was more complete than we had initially expected, thanks to law enforcement's success in tracking down assets that Marcus had accumulated through his various criminal enterprises. Victim restitution funds established through his plea agreement provided compensation for most of the money and property that had been stolen, while also funding prevention programs designed to educate potential targets about the tactics used by organized con artists who specialize in exploiting family relationships. Beyond the practical considerations of money and legal justice was the deeper transformation in our understanding of what genuine family love actually requires. We learned that authentic relationships must be built on honest communication rather than comfortable assumptions, and that protecting people you care about sometimes means challenging their judgment, even when they prefer to believe convenient lies rather than difficult truths. The truck that had begun as a Christmas gift became a symbol of authentic devotion that could survive honest confrontation and emerge stronger for having been tested by crisis. Working together on its maintenance and restoration provided opportunities for conversations that went beyond surface topics to address the fundamental values that would guide our family relationships going forward. These mechanical projects became metaphors for the careful attention and patient effort required to build connections that would resist future attempts at manipulation or deception. Our new family traditions emphasized substance over appearance, prioritizing genuine connection over elaborate celebrations that might attract people motivated by financial rather than emotional interests. Christmas became a time for acknowledging what we genuinely meant to each other, rather than competing to provide the most expensive or impressive gestures of generosity. The authentic relationships that survived our crisis proved more satisfying than the manufactured emotions we had been purchasing through misguided charity toward people who viewed our kindness as opportunity for exploitation. The community impact of our experience continued to expand as other families shared similar stories of being targeted by manipulative individuals who had studied their psychological vulnerabilities to craft deceptions specifically designed to trigger protective instincts and charitable impulses. Our willingness to discuss our experience publicly helped create awareness that protected additional families from falling victim to similar schemes, transforming our private pain into public service that honored the values our parents had always tried to live by. The life lesson that emerged from this painful experience was profound and lasting. Genuine love requires wisdom, as well as kindness, discernment, as well as generosity. Protecting the people you care about sometimes means asking difficult questions and investigating uncomfortable possibilities, even when doing so risks temporary conflict or misunderstanding. Family loyalty demands courage to speak truth when it would be easier to remain silent, and strength to maintain boundaries when others attempt to exploit your compassion for their personal gain. As I reflect on this transformative period in our family's history, I am struck by how close we came to losing everything that actually mattered while investing our emotions and resources in relationships that were completely artificial. The truck that represents my father's lifelong dream now serves as a reminder that authentic love expresses itself through genuine sacrifice and honest communication, not through dramatic performances designed to extract sympathy and support from trusting victims. The restoration work we continue to do together, both on vintage automobiles and on our family relationships, requires the same qualities that make any lasting project successful: patience, precision, commitment to truth over convenience, and appreciation for the difference between superficial appearance and structural integrity. These lessons have made us stronger as individuals and more resilient as a family, better equipped to recognize and resist future attempts to exploit our natural desire to help people in need. Our experience serves as a powerful reminder that healthy skepticism and careful verification are not cynical reactions, but responsible responses to living in a world where some people specialize in weaponizing the kindness of others. True compassion requires wisdom to distinguish between genuine need and calculated manipulation, ensuring that our generosity serves worthy purposes rather than funding criminal enterprises that target families like ours. The happiness we have rediscovered through honest communication and authentic connection proves that families can not only survive betrayal and deception, but can emerge from such experiences with deeper appreciation for the relationships that withstand the test of complete honesty. The truck continues to run beautifully, a rolling testament to the value of taking time to build something authentic rather than accepting attractive imitations that ultimately disappoint everyone involved. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where being generous and trusting led to betrayal by people you were trying to help? How did you handle the balance between maintaining your compassionate nature while protecting yourself from those who might exploit your kindness? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more true family stories, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope your own family relationships are built on the foundation of authentic love and honest communication that makes life truly meaningful.